In this video, we are going to work through the first stage of creating a console-based program that takes some inputs and then calculates the volume of a cylinder. So I've made a simple file here, and I've saved it as convol sil step 1. It's really good as a beginning programmer to break your programs up into these stages because it helps you show your learning, but furthermore, it means if you make some mistake, you can always go back to some stage really easily. So this is going to be a minimal viable product right now, meaning it's just going to run. We're not going to do any error checking. We're not going to take too much time thinking about what it looks like when it outputs. We're just going to get it running as a proof of concept. This allows us to take it and put it into our client's hand and get some feedback really quickly. So the first thing I've done is I've added some comments in here. And comments are simply hashtags followed by some words in Python. So you see here I have a comment that says input. And I've asked the question, what inputs are needed to calculate the volume of the cylinder, process, and then this is essentially taking those inputs and running it through a process. And here is what is the formula used to calculate the volume of the cylinder. And volume is equal to pi times radius times height. So pi r squared h. And then output. What is important about the output here? So this kind of idea of what's called the input process output model is really useful when you're programming. And we're going to think about a lot of our problems in this way. What needs to come in, what needs to be done, and then what comes out at the end. As problems get more complex, we break them into smaller little chunks that we can think about in this way. So the first thing we want to do is just run this program, and let's just see what happens. So I have my console here. I'm going to clear this, Python 3, meaning I'm going to execute the program using Python 3. And the name of the program is convol sil step1.py. So just to be aware, I'm in the folder that this file exists. So if I run it, nothing happens. And nothing happens because all that's in here right now are simply comments. So let's start off and let's take some inputs. So I'm going to take 3 inputs. I'm going to take an input for name, just because it allows us to take something that makes the program a little more personable. So what is your name? I'm going to take an input for the radius, because we see here we need the radius in order to perform that process. So we're going to say input, and we're going to say input radius. Now I'm going to indicate that I want that in centimeters, and we're going to take the height. Input height. Capitalize that. Height in centimeters. Okay. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to come back out here and run this again. I get, what is my name? Paul, radius 4, height 5, and it's done. Now you'll notice if I run this and I say Paul and I put 5.6 and 4.3, it works as well. And that's because the inputs right now are simply strings. So if I come down here to process, and I'm going to say volume equals 3.14, I'll use that to approximate pi, times radius times height. Now if I save this now and try and run this again, Paul, let's put 3 and let's put 4, you'll see I get an error. And this is a runtime error, and it's basically saying that I'm trying to perform some mathematical calculation with what I think is a string. So remembering that in Python, all inputs are taken as strings. So when this input is taken and stored in the variable name, it's going to be a string. When this radius is taken, this input is taken and stored in the variable radius, it's going to be a string. Even though we type in something like 3 or whatever number it is, the computer doesn't know that it is a number. You have to tell it. And to do this, we use a process called casting. So to cast, we use this function called int, and I'm just going to pass radius into it. What this does is it essentially takes whatever value is stored in the variable radius and changes it into an integer, provided it can do that. And we're going to do that for the height as well. So now when I run the program, it's going to take an input for name, store it in the variable name. It's going to take an input for radius, store it in the variable radius, and then it's going to cast that into an int. Then it's going to take an input for height, then cast that to height to an int, and then perform the calculation. So let's see what happens here. So let's pull this up. Let's clear this. And so my name is Paul, and I put in 3 and 4. and it seems to work okay. Now, if I run this, and I put in Paul and I put 4.5, I get an error because I have cast these to ints, not floats. Integer variable types only hold integers. And that's something we're going to save for this, because I'm going to say that the input can only be an integer value. But you'll also see that nothing comes out. And the reason is because I haven't done an output. So I'm going to come to my output section and I'm going to say print volume. So if I save this now and run it, my name is Paul, I'm going to put the radius as 1, and I can put the height as 1. And I get the volume as 3.14. Now, I know this is doing the calculation correct because I can test that calculation out. And it's actually worth doing a couple tests here, and then checking to be sure that the value that you enter calculates correctly. But I want this to be a little bit nicer when I print it. So I'm going to print something like this. The volume is, and I'm going to attach the volume variable onto here. Now if I save this and run it, I'm going to get a little error. And what this error is saying to me is that you're trying to take a string and attach a float to it. The reason volume is a float is because when it actually performs the calculation, 3.14 is a float, and therefore it assumes this entire line will be a float or a real number. To solve this problem, we simply cast this volume to a string. Just like we cast these variables up here to integers, we can cast this to a string. And now, the volume is 113.0399999999. Now it might be nice to clean this up a little bit, but again, this is a minimal viable product. I'm really not interested in making it look nice right now. There's a number of problems with it. I just want to get this to a point where it runs. So last little thing I'm just going to show you with this is, because we output numerical values quite regularly using the print function, you can actually use a comma if you want. And that's another way to do this. So I can put a comma, and then that's a shorthand where Python will know that it actually prints it out, or concatenates it, which just adds it together. Actually, let's clear this. Let's do this. Paul 4, 5, and sure enough, it works. So just to review, we have our comments, which are made using hashtags in Python. Then we break up our program into the input, process, output kind of set. And our inputs are going to be for the name, which we do nothing with. The radius, which we then have to cast to an integer, meaning change the type. The height, which we again have to cast to an integer. I've decided that both the radius and the height have to be integers when they're inputted. And then we perform the calculation for volume. So because 3.14 is a float, what it's going to do is this whole calculation is going to generate a float, or a decimal value, and store that in volume. And then finally the program is going to print out the volume is volume. I hope that video helped. If you have any questions, please let me know. We'll continue to develop this in our next video. Thank you.